Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Pro Dignity No Doubt. I am Nicole Smith, and I'm your hostess for the day. And as with most discussions we have, this one's pretty dense, but this isn't our interview style type format. It's the one we're going to do a deep dive into some aspect of human dignity. And today we're actually going to explore the use of language to justify atrocity. So language has actually always been one of the most powerful tools of control. And history has really proven that the idea of propagandizing is not just about influencing opinion. It's actually about manipulating thought itself. And when language is distorted, it reshapes reality. And it's not by force, but it's actually about erasing critical thinking on a mass scale and replacing it with programmed responses. Because the reality is, propaganda is actually a psychological warfare. Because it's not just that we need to convince someone of a new idea, it's actually that we need to redefine the words that they use, culture at large uses, until moral clarity is destroyed on a mass scale. So if you control language, you control perception. And if you control perception, you can lead people to justify pretty much the most unthinkable horrors that we think are just things of the past. Because we're kind of like, hey, genocide, forced sterilization, eugenics, it's just relics of the past. It's evils that the modern world has outgrown, you know? But the sad thing is, and little do we really know, that we are being manipulated even today. We haven't outgrown these atrocities. We've just kind of given them new names. We're kind of ignoring the reality that we have in front of us. So the same psychological distortions that fueled history's worst atrocities, let's just say that, are still being used today. But the difference is we just reframe oppression as compassion and discrimination as justice. And because once society has redefined human value, eventually it's going to deny it. And again, history kind of proves this. So we're going to take this discussion and break it into 3 parts, because it's not an easy conversation to have, but it's really a necessary one. So let's just buckle up, because today, as most days that you come and listen to me, is that we're going to confront the really hard truths. And today it's confronting the words that justify atrocities. So part 1, we're going to dive into history. Part 2, we're going to dive into current day. Part 3, we're going to dive into some solutions. So let's get into history. So atrocities tend to not begin in violence. They actually tend to begin in the psychological campaigns that are designed to distort human perception, like we were kind of just saying. And kind of because you don't just wake up one morning and as an entire culture decide to suddenly exterminate their neighbors, sterilize people with low incomes, or enslave entire parts of the population. So it's through this like slow, methodical process that culture must first be convinced that these actions are not just permissible, but actually good, necessary, and at times even a righteous action. And that is the power of propaganda. I am going to, in this first section, dive into 3 distinct examples that we can find in the last 100 years, because I think it's important to realize that this is not something of a relic of thousands of years past. It's very new, and a lot of these concepts that are in the last 100 years really are deeply impacting our present. So the first example, I'm sure, was no surprise, but the Holocaust. So before Nazis started murdering 6 million Jews, they first had to redefine how the Jewish people were perceived in public conscience. Because this wasn't just a spontaneous act of hatred, it was actually a state-engineered psychological operation that would condition Germans to see genocide as actual national duty. Because we were like, how do you even do that? Well, it's through language. Because the Jewish people were not just referred to as neighbors or citizens or families anymore. They were actually called subhumans. And I'm not even going to try to use the German word for it, because I don't want to butcher it. But yeah, they typically would start referring to the Jewish people as subhumans. And the moment that label became widely accepted within culture through propaganda, violence wasn't just justifiable, but like I said, a moral imperative. And the Nazis did not just say they were murdering innocent people. They said they were cleansing Germany of disease, purging the nation of parasites. And obviously, they're not going to frame this brutality as brutality. They're going to frame it as like a public health measure. Because again, propaganda doesn't just change facts, it changes perception. It doesn't erase reality, it reframes it so that the mind processes on a mass scale evil as virtue. And it was a linguistic revolution. And that's how an entire nation could be manipulated into complacency. And before you think that this is just some isolated incidents within the evil white race of Europe, yeah, it's something that's been tapped into every part of the world, every corner of the world, every race has essentially done this. And at every point throughout history, it's not just isolated to the Holocaust. And so just to dive into another example that's within the last 100 years, let's go to Rwanda of 1994. And the playbook is used like verbatim. So the Hutu majority didn't just spontaneously decide to butcher 800,000 of their Tutsi neighbors within a 100-day span, like literally a little over 3 months. They eliminated 800,000 of their neighbors. And it was because they were psychologically conditioned for years to see their neighbors, the Tutsis, as subhuman, a threat, a plague that must be eradicated. And the Hutu radio stations, actually newspapers, would pump out propaganda and repeatedly call the Tutsis cockroaches, essentially vermin that needed to be eliminated. And then when you can do that and change the perception of their human value within the larger context of culture, then killings, like, it was just a natural thing. And it wasn't something that was hidden. They didn't do it in secret. They were broadcasted live on the radio where journalists were giving instructions for murder. So friends would turn on friends. And why? Again, because their rational human thought had been replaced with the propaganda. And once society accepts the idea a certain group is a burden, a disease, or a danger, it's eventually going to convince them to murder on mass scale. And then to do so is actually mercy. And so if this feels like it's too far away, how about we just bring it a little bit closer to home. Again, this is still within the context of the last 100 years. Let's just explore the eugenics movement of the US. So most people recognize this name. It's a leader that was at the forefront of the eugenics movement. That would be Margaret Sanger. And for those of you who don't know, that's the founder of Planned Parenthood. And most people don't realize that Sanger didn't just advocate for conception and reproductive rights. She was actually a staunch eugenicist, and this is well recorded. It's not just my, crazy conspiracy theorists or something like that. It's actually well recorded that she believed that the key to progress within society was actually by controlling who is allowed to reproduce. And while supporters of Sanger tried to underplay this, her leadership in this movement, her participation wasn't just about women planning their families. It was actually more sinister than that, eliminating populations that she saw undesirable. And just as a side note, I think you really need to watch the movie, The 1916 Project, because it actually goes into the historical foundation that would pave the way for Sanger, as well as pave the way to sort of a not modern take on the foundation that would lead to the abortion movement of today. But, kind of going back, that was a side. But, Sanger, again, she actually had eugenicist colleagues. She was not alone in this. She used a lot of propaganda tactics because you didn't want to just go out there and discrimination, forced sterilization, reproductive violence. You want to frame it more as improving race for the public good or necessary to progress, that kind of thing. Because essentially, she was going to describe certain groups, the poor, disabled, minorities, as human weeds. And she often did, that was, quote, human weeds. And that to allow unchecked reproduction was spreading degeneracy. It's pretty messed up. So they kind of would sanitize the ideology to make it more palatable. And she would frame birth control as a tool for female empowerment. And because she probably just didn't want to come out with the fact that she was wanting to weed out those that she deemed fit, or at least this group of individuals that had power that decided that Black people or disabled people were not fit to reproduce. And again, before you go on thinking that this was just some fringe belief, there were actual programs for sterilization. And in fact, there would be a court case in 1927, Buck versus Bell, that would go before the Supreme Court, and there would be a decision that would essentially uphold the government's right to forcibly sterilize those that were deemed unfit to reproduce. And again, thousands of women that were Black, disabled, poor were sterilized without their knowledge or even consent. So these efforts were framed as necessary for the greater good. And so this is where I'm going to try to pivot into part 2, taking those historical examples of how language and propaganda, are affecting our modern day. So again, language has always been a tool for manipulation. So shaping not just how we think, but what we justify. And nowhere is more evident in modern day, I think, than abortion and how abortion is sold to women. And I know this is a really tough topic. It's very, very divisive, but I just want I encourage everyone to just take a moment and actually think about what sort of language that we're using around abortion. And if indeed it is a linguistic propagandizing of an entire group of people and making us complacent in something that is deeply unjust. Because it's not like they're going to frame this as a violent ending of a human life. It's going to be an act of empowerment, a moral good, even form of progress. Because women are not told the truth. I believe we're not being told the truth. So instead of manipulation, we're being culpable, led to believe that death is mercy, that aborting our child is freeing ourselves from oppression, hardship, sacrifice, all those sorts of things, that there will be no lasting pain, no lasting psychological scars, no grief, only relief. We're going to gain relief. And again, this is a lot of what you're hearing, that there is not going to be any negative impacts. And if you are experiencing negative impacts, go on the internet, see all the thousands of women that are grieving after they've gotten abortions, that your grief is just stigma, not that you participated in something unnatural or tragic. It's just stigma, and you're wrong for that grief. And this language is designed to not just to justify abortion, but to ensure that women themselves are becoming advocates for it. Because if it's about your empowerment, if it's about becoming equal or having equal stance within society, equal access to, everything that man has ever done, you're becoming an advocate. That's the way that it's being framed. But the reality, I believe, is that we're being lied to. Because what is abortion really offering? It's an economic boost to life free of commitment, guaranteeing that a woman's body is not being tied down to a child for 9 months or even beyond, that child's life might be a drain on her energy or her time or her finances when she doesn't want that to be the case. And it has some societal perks too. Let's just throw this in here. The elimination of those who would be a burden to our systems, like the unborn child that might have a disability or who a disability and require more medical interventions, the baby born into poverty that might be thrown into the foster care system, the child who, because of the circumstances beyond their own control, could one day need social services, public education, or healthcare assistance. So rather than forcing ourselves as a society, actually solve these societal failures, we just kind of tell moms, it's better to erase the problem before the problem actually begins. And it's not just for you, it's for us. And I actually did a deep dive into this discussion a few episodes ago. So go on back and listen to that. But just getting back to the topic at hand, I'm just saying this is not just manipulation. It is a carefully constructed cultural gaslighting campaign, quite frankly. And as a mother whose body was designed to protect, nurture, and sustain life, I'm told that the best thing that I can do is to actually destroy what my body is designed to sustain, because the womb is literally designed for one purpose. You can take it from the body and your body is still going to function. The only purpose that the womb serves is to sustain life, grow life. And I'm being told that this is my right, my freedom, and way to progress in society. And we as women are being conditioned to believe that this is actually even an act of love, of mercy. Let's go back to history. This is all for a societal good, a personal good, that death is better than life, that abortion is better than struggle, that motherhood is a prison, and the only way to liberation is through the destruction of our child, our children, our future. And all the while, society is watching. It's watching in quiet relief, because it's one less dependent. It's one less medical bill. It's one less student. It's one less prisoner. It's one less obligation to fix a broken system. It's one big ploy. It is not women who are being freed from abortion. I'll be very, very plain on this. It's the world that is being freed from us having to support us as women, and the fact that we are life givers, we are superhuman, like we create human, and society is being freed. The world is being freed from our children. And this is what we call progress. This is not progress. This is sanitized eugenics. And if we're following the history and we're following the patterns of how language is being used to manipulate in order for culture at large to produce the injustice for the privileged few, because again, Nazis were not everyone, they manipulated the masses. In Rwanda, the same thing. You had a few manipulating the masses to create injustice. In eugenics, the same thing. The few to manipulate the masses, right? And so if history has proven anything, it is that the moment that we allow language to redefine human value, we open the door for mass injustice. And when culture shifts from seeing dignity as something that is intrinsic to conditional and measured, then it becomes possible, as history says, to justify any manner of oppression, discrimination, and ultimately extermination. And so it never begins with outright and violence. As we said, it starts subtle, deceptive, in language that reframes moral truths into utility, convenience, burden. And it's the foundation for every atrocity in history: slavery to genocide, eugenics to modern abortion advocacy in the way I see it. We see this pattern again and again. If dignity is granted by society, then it can be revoked by society. And that's why at the core of what we do at Dignity Defense Institute, and for those of you who don't know, that's actually the organization that sponsors this podcast. We're all about re-educating the mindset around human value, because we believe that a society that understands the intrinsic worth of human value is a society that will produce the most just outcomes. Because history proves that when we have a society that doesn't value human life at its foundation, it can manipulate that value at will. Again, if dignity is granted by society, then it is revoked by society. And that's why language matters, because it's the difference between justice and genocide, compassion and cruelty, dignity and destruction. It's just a shift in how we speak about human worth. It's really, 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 really important that we understand that our action to combat any type of injustice, whether it's abortion or anything else, we need to be uncompromising in our rejection of the deceptive language. We must strip away the euphemisms that sanitize the evil things within our culture and call them by their true names, because killing the unborn is not, quote, reproductive justice. I'm just going to lay that out there. Ending the life of a disabled child, person, elderly person, it's not death with dignity. Exploitation of vulnerable women in prostitution is not sex work. And that's deeply tied to trafficking as well. It's not sex work. It is not freedom. And these phrases aren't neutral. They are deliberate manipulations designed to make inhumane acts feel righteous and palatable. Words are powerful, and if we allow ourselves to accept these deceptive terminologies, we're going to find ourselves participating in injustice without even realizing it, because it's kind of happening right now based off kind of what I just laid out. We need to speak the truth boldly. These are the action items: that every human being is made in the image of God. We are the image bearers of our Heavenly Father. We are endowed with a dignity that no government, no court, no cultural consensus can erase. That true justice is built on recognizing and protecting dignity, even if it is inconvenient. Because that's the problem. We are so bent on a life free of inconvenience and challenges. And we can't do that because that is language, and this sort of like cultural shift is the bedrock of injustice. And we can't remain silent. History doesn't look kindly on those who that stood silent while injustice flourished. And we look back on those people that participated with such disdain, and yet here we stand doing the exact same thing. And if we allow culture to decide whose life has value, we inevitably repeat the horrors of the past, like we're saying. And the only way to stop the cycle is to reject moral cowardice and stand firm in the truth that even when it costs us, we must stand for that truth. Because building a society that embraces all life, quite frankly, it's not easy. Just by like magically accepting human value at all levels is not us saying that it's not going to be hard. In fact, life is freaking hard, man. Like, duh. But denying that human life and value in order to try to erase inconvenience and pain, like there's a cost to it. Again, I talk about that in another episode if you want to do a deep dive again. But we want to build a society that embraces life, knowing that it's not an easy path. And again, as a mother of a child with disabilities, I know firsthand that embracing life does not mean embracing ease. Life with my daughter is not easy, but it means that I'm choosing love. It means I'm choosing sacrifice. It means I'm choosing self-improvement. And I'm embracing perseverance in the face of hardship. And again, my character development comes in that. But the answer is never to choose to throw life away just because it might be difficult. The answer is to rally around life, to support it, to uphold dignity of all life. Because if there isn't a recognized dignity of all life, then what point is there even injustice, but also compassion? What does it mean to even rally around women that are struggling in life, to rally around any women that needs support through motherhood and parenthood? Yeah, we need to build a society that looks more just, but also one that's more compassionate. And the only way to do that is actually to recognize inherent value of every human life. And so, okay, this was a hard discussion. Again, just reiterating that choosing life is not easy, but it's worth it. I want to invite you to come back again 2 weeks from now. I have a really, really exciting announcement that we are going to welcome 2 very unique voices to the podcast to really do a deeper dive into the discussion around abortion within culture from 3 very distinct perspectives. So we have Jenny Sue. I released her podcast and a discussion for her testimony last episode. And just a sneak peek, she was trafficked by her grandfather. And at one point, she's forced to have an abortion. And it was a devastating but very, very powerful testimony. Jenny Sue's like just a rock star, and now is actually an advocate on the international stage in the anti-trafficking world. Victoria Robinson, she is another voice we're bringing on. She had 2 little girls and then a divorce and a unwanted pregnancy. She chose abortion. And then I'm in that discussion as well, having a child from birth with disabilities. And we really wanted to explore this really tough conversation from 3 women with 3 very distinct experiences that have an insight into what it feels like to live through these circumstances, and then discuss personally, but also culturally, the ramifications of abortion and what it means on that personal level. So I really invite you to come back next episodes that be released in 2 weeks from this date, on Tuesday, I think should be. And also, if you're really enjoying this type of content and this deep dive, I know it's really dense, but it's very important that we have these discussions. Please subscribe and even consider supporting the podcast, because as all things, it costs money to produce and keep things like this going. So again, thank you for coming on for another episode of Pro Dignity No Doubt. I'm excited to introduce you to our next topic soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.